let's look at how to use the graphing calculator to specifically do transformations for rational functions. I've already done a video on general transformations, so this one I'm going to look at specifically for rationals. And as always, I'm using a TI-84 plus CE, but a lot of what I say will apply to any. Now the rational functions can be a little bit trickier. So let's say I've got something like this. So let's hit y equals. Now, again, the newer calculators, I do have a way of entering a fraction. So if I hit alpha and then y equals, I'm going to get this little menu, and I'm going to pick that first option, n over d, and that is going to allow me to have a fraction, which means I can type that in a little bit more easily. So I've got the 2 on top, the x plus 1 on the bottom, and let's hit right to get out of that fraction. Again, that is subtraction, not a negative. So again, I hit subtraction. As always, make sure we're careful to pick the correct one. Otherwise, our graph is going to look different than what we think it should look like. And let's hit graph. So if we remember how our transformations look, we should be going down 5. That plus 1 is our horizontal, and those are backwards from how we think it should be. So I'm going to go left 1. And that 2 up top is going to be a stretch vertically. Now, you'll notice I have gaps where asymptotes are. Now, if you haven't talked about asymptotes yet, you'll get that later. But I'm going to do a separate video on how to help see those asymptotes. For now, I kind of look at where those gaps are, and those are where my various asymptotes ought to be. Now, let's say you've got an older calculator that doesn't allow you to type in that fraction, or for some other reason your calculator is giving you an error message when you try to do that. So if you can't get a fraction, what I always tell students is put parentheses around the entire numerator, hit that division key, and then put parentheses around the entire denominator. And then of course if you've got any other terms, we will put that on at the end as we would normally. Now, you don't always need parentheses around both. Here, I technically don't need parentheses around the numerator because it's just one term. But to make it simpler for my students, I always just tell them parentheses around the numerator and parentheses around the denominator. One less thing for them to remember. And again, that is subtract 5, not minus 5. And let's go ahead and hit graph again. And this does look exactly the same as how I got it the first time. So again, this is what I do if my calculator is giving me difficulty. Now this will work even if I've got more complicated graphs. Now we wouldn't try to normally find transformations from that one because it's pretty nasty, but let's go ahead and just graph it to see what it looks like. So again, if I've got that alpha y equals, I will definitely hit that. But again, if I don't, I'll put parentheses around the numerator and parentheses around the denominator. And let's go ahead and type it in like that. So x squared plus 7x subtract 3, end parenthesis, divided by parenthesis, x squared subtract 5x plus 1. Again, I always tell my students, put the parentheses in as you're typing it by hand so that when I have it on my calculator, I can compare the two and say, does this look like what I've written by hand? Because again, I always want the two of them to look the same. And let's hit graph. Now again, this is a much more complicated graph, so I'm not going to try and figure out what those transformations are because they get pretty nasty pretty quick. But we can at least see what that looks like. Now again, I'm going to do a separate video on asymptotes, but here I can at least see, well, I've got a gap. Not at 0, looks like just a little bit higher than 0, maybe 1. And I've got a gap here. Again, it's not quite at 0, it's a little bit above there. And then I've got a gap a little bit further on. And again, I will do a separate video about how to find those asymptotes using your calculator. But this is my general video for graphing with rational functions.